Behind me are the graves of over 33,000 German soldiers who never made it home from the Second World War. How does one comprehend such a large number of human loss, individual stories and tragedies connected to each one of those losses? This video isn't about glorifying the regime that these men fought and died for. It's about understanding their individual stories so we can broaden our historical understanding of the time period. I'm standing here in Andilly, France. This is the largest German World War II cemetery located in the country. And we're going to be covering some of the individual stories who are buried here in this cemetery and what brought them here laying on this hillside in France. This is the German War Cemetery at Andilly in northeastern France, near the town of Toul in the Grand Est region. It is the largest German Second World War cemetery in France, with more than 33,000 war dead that are buried here. Andilly is here for a specific historical reason. On the 12th of September 1944, the American Burial Service began burying both American and German casualties here. These were men initially killed in the fighting west of Metz. Thus was created the U.S. Temporary Cemetery at Andilly, with about 3,400 American and 5,000 German casualties buried here. After the war, American graves were moved to permanent U.S. cemeteries, and Andilly became a German cemetery through reburials and consolidation. A key moment was the 1954 Franco-German War Graves Agreement, and from 1957 onward, more German dead were transferred in from across the wider region. During this work, nearly 2,000 previously unknown German war dead were also discovered, mainly in the Vosges area. The cemetery was officially inaugurated on the 29th of September 1962. Today, the cemetery is maintained by the German War Graves Commission, the Volksbund Deutsche Kriegsgräberfürsorge. Their mission is to search for and recover German war dead abroad, identify them when possible, give them a dignified burial, and care for these gravesites as places of remembrance, education, and reconciliation. The Volksbund cares for around 830 war cemeteries in 45 different countries, with about 2.8 million war dead spread between these cemeteries. Without the work of the German War Graves Commission, visiting cemeteries like this may not be possible. After the Allies captured Paris in 1944, the Germans began their retreat towards the Rhine. And there was a lot of individual small battles that were going on in between during this retreat, as well as the siege of Metz. A lot of the soldiers who were buried here in Andilly would have died during one of these fighting skirmishes or engagements. A number like 33,000 is hard to comprehend, especially when you're talking about the loss of human life. But when you actually stand in front of one of these stones and read the name and try to learn a little bit about that story, the humanity aspect really comes through. Let's start by talking about one of the stories of one of the individuals buried here. Anton Sökefeld was born on the 27th of July, 1919 in Neuenheerse. He grew up in a large family, one of 9 children, and like many young men of his generation, he first completed the Reich's labor service before entering the Wehrmacht in 1939. What makes Anton's story feel so human is that parts of his correspondence survived, especially letters to his sister Anna. In one letter during training in October 1939, he complains how hard they're being drilled by the instructors. A few days later, he took his oath. On the 15th of October, 1939, he writes that they could volunteer for different paths, such as pilot, radio operator, or paratrooper. Anton chose not to volunteer. At that moment, he thought he might be better off staying tied to a civilian profession and getting home sooner. However, the war didn't follow anyone's plans. Anton served in a parachute regiment, and in a letter dated January 30th, 1942, he told his family that he had been appointed Unteroffizier, the equivalent of an NCO, on that same day. In that letter, he also mentions being again in Breslau and at Fortress Glatz, which functioned as a Wehrmacht prison during the war. He doesn't explain what happened there, but he leaves you with a line that really sticks, hoping he never becomes the escorted instead of the escort. The family record says his parachute regiment was deployed on the Eastern Front and later in Italy. And then we get one last surviving letter, dated January 26, 1944, after he returned to his unit stationed in the Alps following holiday leave at home. He jokes that his comrades admitted they had already divided the Christmas gifts meant for them. But he says he didn't mind because he still felt like the luckiest one simply for having been able to spend the holidays at home. Just months later, that was gone. Anton was killed on the 13th of September 1944 at Tonnay, on the Moselle in France, shot in the head during a defensive fighting. His unit later wrote to the family that his wound was instantly fatal, and because they were forced to withdraw under enemy pressure, they couldn't bury him, and they couldn't send home any personal belongings. But the impact and tragedy of this war did not stop for his family with Anton. His mother didn't just lose one son, she was forced to live through the loss of several. His brother Liberius was killed on the 3rd of September 1939 in Poland during the first days of the war. Another brother, Johannes, was killed on the 29th of January 1945, fighting around Allenstein. Another brother, Alios, was reported missing in February 1945 near Frauenburg. And Josef Johannes, known as Jupp in his family, was killed on the 3rd of February 1945 in the fighting around Pilau. That is what war looks like when it reaches into one household. Not just one loss, but a family being broken again and again. From the opening days of the war till its final months. And when you strip away the uniforms and the unit names, Anton was just a 25-year-old from Neuenhausen, someone with a family, a home, and a life that never got the chance to fully begin. So right now I want to give you a unique example about an individual who didn't just fight in the First World War, he fought and died in the Second World War. And what makes today's story a little bit unique is I have a family member with me today, and he's going to talk a little bit about his great-grandfather.
Hi, my name is Danny. I'm head of communications at the Volksbund, and working at the Volksbund is also a private experience for me. I'm the first one actually in my family who visits this grave, the grave of Paul Issel, who was an NCO in the German army in the Second World War, but he also fought in the First World War. He was only 16 when he joined. Then later became, during the First World War he was wounded several times. We know this from the primary documents that we got from the German military archive. But later, in the early 1920s, he joined the German Zoll, which is the German customs service, and then later was redeployed to Austria after the Anschluss in '38. And my family actually had to escape when the Red Army advanced into Austria, and I ended up in Bavaria, then later was sent to Hesse as a refugee family and started a new life there. And they learned about the fate or what happened to my great-grandfather only due to the work of the Volksbund. They were notified by the Volksbund that he died during the battle for Alsace on October 31, 1944. But they never made the way to Andilly to visit his grave. So literally, I'm the first one in my family who's here at this grave.
That's one of the stories that really just share the humanity of it, how the affected soldiers here, the impact didn't just end after they died. Their families were affected by it for generations to come. And that's also really important about the Volksbund, the kind of work that they do. Not only are they maintaining these war graves, they're also doing the research of the individual people to try to remember the fallen in a respectful, non-glorifying way. And Danny's example with his great-grandfather is a perfect example of the kind of important work that the German Volksbund is doing. And if you think it's an important work as well, you should consider donating to this organization. It's a humanitarian organization that I've personally also donated to. And I just think the work that they do is fantastic. just for the whole humanitarian aspect of what war graves are. I would like to request more of your time as we move to the next story, that of Hermann Danzer. He was a lieutenant and from Vienna, Austria. Let's go talk about his story. Hermann Danzer was born on the 25th of June, 1916, in Vienna, Austria. All we could find about his life before the war is the basic information, such as his name, where he came from, and the fact that the war pulled him into uniform. By 1940, he was a lieutenant. The American equivalent would be a second lieutenant, serving as a platoon leader in 2nd Company, Panzer Pioneer Battalion 57 with the 6th Panzer Division. That matters because he was an engineer officer in a fast-moving armored unit. His story is tied to one decisive moment during the Battle of France. On the 19th of June, 1940, the 6th Panzer Division reached orders to capture the fortress position at Issel. In a surprise attack, the first phase went well and the German forces took fortifications on the western bank of the Moselle River. But the French defenders on the eastern bank were ready. There were 6 bridges over the river, 4 had been destroyed, and another was heavily damaged. So it became crucial to seize the one remaining undamaged bridge. A pioneer assault troop under Danzer was sent forward, but they couldn't reach the bridge because of heavy enemy fire. Then Danzer noticed something unusual. During a pause in the fighting, civilians were able to cross the bridge without being fired on. According to the accounts we have, he used that as cover. He put on a civilian work coat and hat, commandeered a delivery truck, and drove towards the bridge disguised as a civilian worker. At the bridge, he jumped out and began cutting demolition wires and throwing the explosives into the river. The French eventually realized what was happening and opened fire. He was hit in the neck, but kept working, clearing and tossing one charge after the other into the water until he had removed what he could see. After that, Danzer tried to run back across the bridge towards the German side. Near the end of the bridge, he was hit again and collapsed. A pioneer and a motorcycle messenger rushed him and carried him out of enemy fire. But he died of his wounds the next day, the 20th of June, 1940. For that action, he was recommended for the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on the 19th of June, 1940. He never lived to receive it. The Knight's Cross was awarded posthumously on the 21st of December, 1940. And he is also listed as having received both the Iron Cross Second Class and the Iron Cross First Class. Today, Hermann Danzer lies here at Andilly in Plot 33, Row 10, Grave 697. One grave that ties this quiet cemetery back to a single violent moment in 1940. And to a life that ended at just 23 years old. Danzer is one of the few casualties buried here who died during the German attack on France in 1940. The majority of the casualties interred here in Andilly are from the German retreat back towards the Rhine River in late 1944. Lieutenant Hermann Danzer, if you take away the politics of the time and just focus on the humanity aspect, it's another tragedy, loss of life that shouldn't have happened. He died fighting for a criminal ideology that would later cause the deaths of millions more people through the next 5 years to come. He passed in 1940. The war ended in 1945. Think about the tragic loss of life that occurred between those 5 years. Earlier, I mentioned the 33,000 plus German soldiers who are buried here and how that number is hard to comprehend and it can get easily lost looking at a piece of paper. But each one of those 33,000 plus were either sons, brothers, uncles, fathers. And you have to look at the humanity aspect of it. For an example, right here, we have the grave of Josef Amann. He died on the 1st of November, 1944, but he was somebody's uncle. As we can see here, a family member extended the grave with a text that says, "My loving Uncle Josef," and the relative's name. The next story we're going to talk about is a little bit uncomfortable. That is Waffen-SS officer Fritz Klingenberg. It's important to talk about uncomfortable parts of history because if we only talk about the history that's comfortable, we'll never learn from it. And it helps enhance our historical understanding of the time period and the situation where these 33,000 plus soldiers found themselves living in. And here we come to the grave of Fritz Klingenberg. He is best known for his role in the surrender and capture of Belgrade in April 1941. Fritz was born on the 17th of December 1912 in Rivershagen in northern Germany. Before the war, he finished school with the Abitur, began studying chemistry in Rostock, and then left those studies behind. That's because in 1934 he joined the SS Verfügungstruppe, the armored SS, and went through officer training school at the SS Junker School in Bad Tölz. During the war, he served with the Waffen-SS division Das Reich, and the episode he's best known for happened in April 1941 during the invasion of Yugoslavia. According to the account in his Knight's Cross citation, he was leading a small forward detachment tasked with capturing the Danube Bridge north of Belgrade. The situation changed quickly. Bridges were already blown, so he crossed the river by boat with a small group and pushed into the city anyway. The same citation says his group used captured vehicles, reached key points in the city, and raised the German flag at the German embassy. The mayor was summoned, and being under the impression that the stronger German forces already were in control, he formally surrendered the city that evening. The citation also claims to reinforce that impression, the group drove through the city and fired on soldiers they encountered, and that around 1,000 prisoners were taken before larger German units arrived during the night. For that operation, Klingenberg received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross on the 14th of May, 1941. Later in the war, he served in various staff and training roles connected to Bad Tölz, and in January 1945, he took command temporarily of the 17th SS Panzer Division Götz von Berlichingen as the Western Front collapsed. He was killed near Herxheim in the Palante in late March 1945 at just 32 years old. And whatever you think about his story, this is incredible important context. The Waffen-SS as an organization was part of the SS, and thus deeply tied to the Nazi system and its crimes. Standing here at Andilly, the point isn't to celebrate or glorify anyone. It's to help us understand what these graves represent and how war turns individual lives into pieces of a much larger human tragedy. Learning Fritz's story begs the question, what brings a bright young man to the point to abandon his studies and serve in the SS? It was the ideology that brought him to this point, and in the end, it cost him his life. Now let's go to the next story together, that of Georg Biersack. He was in a grenadier regiment and comes from the town of Hohenschambach in Bavaria. On the 14th of January 1914 in Hohenschambach in Bavaria. For his life before the war, the sources we have only give us the basics, his name, where he came from, and that the war turned him into an experienced NCO. He held the rank of Oberfeldwebel, that's a senior non-commissioned officer. And if you want to understand the kind of war that he lived through, the clearest biography that we have is actually written in his awards, because they trace years of combat and survival. He is listed as receiving the Iron Cross 2nd Class and 1st Class. He also held the Infantry Assault Badge in Silver, an award tied directly to infantry combat, and the Close Combat Clasp in Bronze, which tells you he wasn't fighting this war from a distance. He carried the Black Wound Badge, meaning he had already been wounded and lived through it. And he received the Eastern Front Medal for the winter campaign of 1941 through 1942, one of the harshest periods of the war. His highest listed award was the German Cross in Gold, awarded on the 10th of July, 1943. On that award, he's enlisted as an Oberfeldwebel in the 10th Company of the Grenadier Regiment 20, in the 10th Infantry Division, motorized. That award sits above the Iron Cross 1st Class and points to a repeated bravery or leadership under fire over time. not just one moment. And after all that, Georg Biersack was killed on the 23rd of September 1944 at Saint-Mure in France. Today he lies here in Andilly, in plot 17, row 9, grave 658, one name that represents years of combat and a war that followed him across Europe before it finally ended his life at just 30 years old. It's important to remember the uncomfortable history that was the Second World War, an absolute tragedy in human life. The Volksbund, the German War Graves Commission, exists to ensure the dead are treated with dignity and not forgotten. But that work only matters if we're also willing to face what these stories represent. Some of the biographies we've discussed here are difficult, and they should be, because real historical understanding doesn't come from avoiding the uncomfortable parts. It comes from confronting them honestly. This video is part of my multi-part series in France, where I'm visiting several German war graves from the First and Second World War, traveling along with the German War Graves Commission to help document these places and the history that they force us to reckon with. The First and Second World War were absolute human tragedies, and it is important to understand them so we can learn from them and help us shape a better future. Thank you for watching.